Perfect. Well, welcome and thank you for coming to the Gwendolyn Brooks Youth Poetry Awards Teaching Poetry Workshop for grades K through 5. We will also have a second portion for today's workshop for grades 6 to 12 at 1 p.m. after this. This is our 6th year of hosting Gwendolyn Brooks Youth Poetry Award in partnership with the Poetry Foundation, Brooks Permissions, and UChicago Arts Logan Media Center, so thank you. Continuing the tradition started by the Pulitzer Prize-winning Illinois Poet Laureate herself in 1970, the Gwendolyn Brooks Youth Poetry Award celebrates the creative expression of youth throughout Illinois. Before we start, for housekeeping for today's program, we request that the audience use the chat function to ask any questions for Leslie and Timothy. Today's programs will be recorded and shared out to everyone who's RSVP'd in the follow-up email, along with some of the resources that are shared today. I'd also like to read our land acknowledgement as we begin. At Illinois Humanities, we respectfully acknowledge that the land on which our main office is located is made up of territories and lands of the people of Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa nations, as well as many other tribes who have called this land home, including Miami, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee nations. These nations were forcibly removed from their traditional territories. However, these lands continue to carry the stories, resilience, and tenacity of these nations. Despite the federal and local government enforced policies of genocide of American Indians, Chicago is home to the 3rd largest urban Indian population, representing more than 100 different tribal nations. Now I'll hand it off to Leslie Reese, who's very soon, but I wanted to thank the Poetry Center for their partnership and amazing poets in residence you'll be hearing from today. Leslie Reese is a poet, writer, and an interdisciplinary arts educator, and her bio will be added to the chat. Thank you so much for being here, Leslie, and I'll hand it off to you now.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you everyone who is attending. My name is Leslie Reese, as Jen said. I am a poet in residence with the Chicago Poetry Center. And so I would like to open this workshop up with some poetry. And I would like to encourage you just to enjoy it. It's something I like to encourage just the listening. I encourage the listening for favorite words, favorite lines, phrases, or even if you just enjoy the music of listening. In 2020, when we were first having the lockdown, Chicago Poetry Center was maybe the first creative literacy arts organizations to pivot quickly and create video lessons with which to finish out that school year. And one of the lessons that I created was something called the My World poems. And I was inspired to do this because there was so much was going on, and I was wondering how the 2nd graders who I was doing residencies with, how they were feeling, how their parents were feeling. And I found this wonderful little girl's poem by Gwendolyn Brooks. I actually found it in an anthology of books called This Place I Know, Poems of Comfort. And later I found out that, there is a book that has been created from the poem, and the name of the book is We Are Shining. So I would like to first share Gwendolyn Brooks, A Little Girl's Poem, and follow that up with a poem that I wrote kind of in response to it. Okay. A Little Girl's Poem by Gwendolyn Brooks. Life is for me, and it is shining inside me. I feel stars and sun and bells singing. There are children in the world all around me and beyond me, here and beyond the big waters, here and in countries peculiar to me, but not peculiar to themselves. I want the children to live and to laugh. I want them to sit with their mothers and fathers and have happy cocoa together. I do not want fire screaming up to the sky. I do not want families killed in their doorways. Life is for us, for the children. Life is for mothers and fathers. Life is for the tall girls and boys in the high school on Henderson Street. Is for the people in African tents, the people in English cathedrals, the people in Indian courtyards, the people in cottages all over the world. Life is for us and is shining. We have a right to sing. And then my poem goes something like this. Life is for us and it shines, after Gwendolyn Brooks' A Little Girl's poem. We have a right to sing. Children who hurt and children who wonder, children who hide when they hear thunder, children who can't get enough sleep and children who require a moment to weep. Hungry children on the run from war and guns, who don't have enough sun, who aren't having enough fun. We have a right to our songs. We deserve to be safe and grow strong. We want warm corners and fresh open spaces. We want the sun on our faces. We want blessings and graces. We want nourished bellies, warm from cocoa and cream. No falling towers that scream. We have the right to our dreams. We want to happily dance and not worry. So many of us need to share our story. We have a right to our songs. We deserve to be safe and grow strong. So thank you for listening to that poetry. I wonder if any of you have a favorite line or word or anything. You can put it in the chat if you do or not. So with that, I suppose I will move on to singing songs. And with that lesson, what we do is we think about the things that we like about the world, and we think about the things that we might like to change in the world. And it's really fun to see what second graders want. I did the lesson recently, and one of the students had, one of his things was no adults. Some children have written poems, they said, bedtime for adults, but not for kids. You know, different things. Well, you can only imagine. And there will be a link put up later where you can visit the Chicago Poetry Center student poems blogs at any time that you like and read poems that are written by 2nd through 8th graders. So that's just something to consider. So with that, I think I will move forward. And what I'm going to share with you today, we're going to talk about the 4 frameworks that Chicago Poetry Center uses for introducing poetry into classrooms. And then I'm going to show you a few of my favorite books. And then I will show you one of our actual lessons, the actual worksheet for the lesson. And then, you know, I guess we'll have wrapped up. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, then we'll take it from there. So I'm just gonna kind of touch on these things. I'm going to share some direct quotes. These 4 frameworks you can read about more fully. The executive director of the Chicago Poetry Center, Elizabeth Metzger Sampson, wrote a piece that is on the Poetry Foundation website, and it's called, um, hmm, my mind is skipping. So maybe, look, maybe it'll come back to me. Um, okay. So at any rate, the 4 frameworks within this piece. The first is art class with words. This is how we like to talk about poetry, especially when first introducing it into the classroom. Thank you. Before we begin, Jen, yes, thank you very much. So the piece is called Before We Begin. And that's where these 4 frameworks are written about in detail. So art class with words, when you hear that phrase, what comes to your mind? Anybody? Any thoughts you might want to slip into the chat? Okay. One of the reasons why we like to say art class with words, because many children have had some sort of experience with art, whether it's coloring with crayons, whether it's painting, whether it's making things with paper. Be messy. Indeed, we're going to be messy with words. We're going to use words as our paint. Words are going to be like our art supplies. And I find that young people really gravitate towards that. They like that idea. It frees things up a little bit. It's a metaphor that they understand. Colorful, indeed, yes. Colorful is another excellent word to use when we think about art class with words. We're going to be exploring the colors, the multi-hues of language, the moods, the textures, the messages, the things that make our imagination explode. So the second framework is, and also with that art class with words, we want to encourage play. We want to encourage experimentation. The second of the 4 frameworks is recess for rules on language. Okay, and one of the things that Elizabeth Sampson says in the piece is, language is used to test, rank, and place students throughout their education. To clarify for students that language will not be tested, marked, or graded, we like to say recess for rules on language. Feel free. Creative spelling is encouraged. If you like to do illustrations on your paper to accompany your words, that is welcome. You don't have to worry about correct punctuation. You don't have to worry about so many sentences to a paragraph. If some of your letters are uppercase or lowercase, it's all good. So everyone loves recess during the school day, and recess for rules on language is one of those things that we introduce that young people like. And I want to share a little story here about a time in which I was volunteering with Literacy Chicago, and I was facilitating an adult learner reading group. These were adults ranging between the ages of 18 and 70 who read at like 1st through 5th grade level. And in this particular book discussion group, we would read adult books that many of the students could not read, but they could read. We used it to practice reading aloud, but we also chose books that had an audio book to go with it so that we could listen and read along. And we did, even though the actual reading text was too advanced for many of these readers, the content that comes up in the books is not. So they can always have a discussion about the content. What's the story? In this case, we were reading Marcus Zusak's The Book Thief. And I chose this section to read in which The Book Thief takes place in 1939 in Germany. And the main character's name is Liesel. She's 9 years old and she's learning to read, and her reading coach is an adult who isn't that proficient a reader himself. So they're on this exploration to learn how to read together. But in this particular passage, it's a passage about a child dreading being called on in class to read. He's sweating. He's afraid that if he doesn't read well, the teacher will rap his knuckles with a ruler. He's afraid that the other students are going to snicker. It's just all of that anxiety and all of that dread of being asked to read aloud in class. And I knew that a number of these adult students had that same fear. And we wanted to have this non-judgmental zone where, if it takes you a long time to get through a sentence while reading aloud, we all wait patiently. We don't help you unless you request our help. So while we were reading, one student was reading the passage and the other students were listening. And at one point, the student next to the reader started to laugh. The reader turned and said, "Stop laughing at me." And the one who laughed said, "I'm sorry, I wasn't laughing at you." She said, "Miss Reese, I never knew that a book could make you laugh." And I tell that story because it really hit me in a deep place. And it made me aware of how many people don't know that language can be something that can be delightful, maybe that can be liberatory. They've had unfortunate experiences with language, unfortunate experiences with learning poetry, unfortunate experiences with learning spelling and grammar and everything. Maybe there's been a lot of shame involved. And so there's a lot of people walking around as adults even who don't know that a book can make you laugh, don't know that a poem can make you laugh. And so, yeah, I just, that's something that took place that I take with me everywhere I go, because, we don't want young people growing up feeling bad about learning to use language. Okay, all right, on my soapbox. The third framework is join in and make a mess. Join in and make a mess. How do we show that we, teachers, will be different during creative lessons? The key is for teachers to become active participants in the enjoyment of poetry and to let students see this change through modeling exploration and a bit of untidy creative energy. And so that also means, and I grew up in a milieu where, the teacher knows everything. The teacher doesn't make mistakes. The teacher doesn't run into dilemmas. And one of the things that's kind of fun when we're doing poetry is sometimes for us, for students to be able to see adults working through being creative, trying to come up with creative ideas, trying to make creative ideas come together, trying to enlarge our imagination. I think that I noticed that students love to hear about when you were little. You know, a lot of times children think that adults are ready-made, like we just showed up on the scene as adults. You know, they don't think about that we were once little kids too, you know, with our two front teeth missing, that we didn't always know how to spell, that we didn't always know how to read, that we never made mistakes in class, that a teacher never said, stop talking so much, or whatever. So when we're teaching poetry, you know, we have so many opportunities to model being inquisitive, model having wonder about the world, delighting in words, being imaginative, being inventive, all those types of things. And for the fourth framework, language through a conscientious lens. And here we're talking about letting poetry be a place where culture or linguistic heritage is not prized over another. We can make space for multiple voices, languages, and vernaculars. And I also, you know, in other words, it's beautiful to be able to, I don't think that when I was young, there was as much diversity in children's writing as there is now. And I spend a lot of time in libraries and bookstores, just kind of, sometimes I hate to call it the children's section. I have my own growing collection of what I like to call illustrated books. And, you know, they're family friendly. Many of them have beautiful illustrations. It's a wonderful way to introduce art as well as poetry. Yes. I also sometimes I bring library books into the classroom with me to read from. I like to let students know I go to the library. I borrow books from the library. So yeah, the illustrated books. So and I'll be sharing a few book titles with you before this session is out. I love to teach, especially for the initial lessons. I love for the model poems, for the example poems, to be poems that are written by other young people, so that children can feel like, oh, other kids do this too. Oh, this is something that I can get into. Poetry isn't for people who are old. Poetry isn't for people who are dead. Poetry is for people like me, you know? And so with that being said, I think that is all I have to say about the 4 frameworks. So those are the things, those are some of the main concepts with which Chicago Poetry Center facilitates, builds our poetry lessons around. I'm going to share a couple of visuals with you of books that I recommend. Of course, I recommend a host that are not going to be pictured. And then we're going to have a look at a Chicago Poetry Center lesson for young people. So this book is called An Emotional Menagerie, Feelings from A to Z. And as you can see, this page is next to it, there's a poem called Q is for Quarrelsome. And in an emotional menagerie, all of the poems imagine whatever the emotion is, whether it's curiosity, whether it's anger, whether it's sadness, in this case, quarrelsome. All of the poems imagine if that emotion were an animal. And all of the poems rhyme. And they're wonderful poems to look at. They're wonderful poems to read. And for especially like when we're talking about the social emotional intelligence, it's a great way it's a great way to have a discussion around things like that. And you can also talk about things like personification and rhyme as well, if you want to. Let's see. So let me see if I can read just a tad of this. Q is for, oh, thank you, Jen. All right. Q is for quarrelsomeness. If quarrelsomeness were an animal, it would have curling horns and use them to charge straight into so it's a little too small for me to read, and that's just as well because I don't have enough time. All right, thank you, Jen. Would you take us to the next slide? Thank you. The Undefeated by Kwame Alexander. A lot of these poets write books specifically for young people. And it's not that I don't think that there are adult poems that young people won't like, but there's kind of like a feast of poems that have been written specifically with young people in mind. And so I like to turn to some of those. So Kwame Alexander is one of those poets who consistently produces books of poems for, I would say, from probably K through 8. Bravo, Margarita Engel. So these, and A Songbird Dreams of Singing. A Songbird Dreams of Singing are poems about sleeping animals. And so I just wanted to bring that in to say that, there's poetry that ties in with other subject matter. So if you're doing science, sometimes it's fun to use poetry because the way that children listen, all of the poems in A Songbird Dreams of Singing are rhyming poems. There's 17 of them, and you learn all these cute little things about the sleeping habits of animals, how koala bears or panda bears hold hands so that they won't float away from each other. You learn about the sloth, why the sloth is so slow and how the foods that it eats don't really provide that much energy for them. At any rate, yeah, and it's really fascinating. Young people love it. Okay. Jen, can we go to the next slide? I Know You Anywhere, My Love is another rhyming poem. It's a poem that has been extended into the book. I like to bring books into the classroom that allow me like a sneaky way to kiss and hug on my students with words. So a book like I Know You Anywhere, My Love, which is about how, every person, every animal has something so distinct about them. You would never forget them, you know, my love. Of course, Gwendolyn Brooks, a tiger who wore white gloves. This is a classic. Janet S. Wang, a suitcase of seaweed. This particular book here is not an illustrated book, but I have used the poems with 4th and 5th graders, and I would definitely say probably maybe 6th and maybe 7th graders. Janet S. Wang, I believe one of her parents is Korean, one of her parents is Chinese, and she also has a French grandparent. And so particularly in a suitcase of seaweed, the book is divided into like 3 sides of her experience. So there's like a section that talks specifically about her her Chinese culture, one part that talks specifically about her Korean culture, and the other part that talks about her American culture. And I think that young people are relieved to know that many people have mixed heritages, have multiple heritages, and it's a wonderful way to talk about identity. But the book itself is not so much about identity. There's poems about food, there's poems about grandparents. And so, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, it doesn't, it's not to be political, I guess I would say. Woke, a young poet's call to justice. And the poems in this book address being a poet, address being different, address being wanting to make positive changes in the world. Many juicy subjects and things that, you know, we can't pretend that young people don't know what's going on in the world. And but these poems in Woke are geared specifically towards them. Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Jen. I think we're finished with the looking at the books. So now what I think we'll do, I'm going to show you, this is like what a typical sort of Chicago Poetry Center lesson might look like. So for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders, the first 5 lessons are, we do a wish poem, we do a sound poem, we do comparisons, we do dreams, and we do something called Swan of Bees, which just allows for all sorts of inventive and ridiculous ideas, you know. So for the sound poem, the first thing that we might do is introduce this warm up. So before we even start anything, before we even look at any poems, we may just sit in a circle, or in, you know, in certain times, we can't always sit in circles, but we like to have like a family, a circle feeling, a family circle feeling. And we'll just ask, do you have a favorite sound? So let me put that question to the people who are sharing with us today. Do you have a favorite sound? Are happy sounds different from sad sounds? What sounds are loud? What sounds are quiet? Yes, yes, Bob, coffee machine in the morning. That's always one of my favorites, indeed. Chirping birds. Yes. Yes. All right. And, you know, stopping for a moment, because I don't think people are walking around every day going, what's my favorite sound? And so this poem is also an invitation for young people to pause for a minute and think about sounds. think about how much sonic information they're taking in all day. And then we go into, so we'll have a discussion, a lively discussion about sounds. And then we'll go and look at 2 student poems. And I asked the students, much like I asked you when I read the 2 earlier poems, as we read, notice what is making sound and how the poets choose to describe those sounds. Okay, thank you, Jen. All right, so this poem is written by a 4th grader called What I Hear in School. I hear an intercom and I hear other classes, and I also hear choir students. It sounds like Lincoln Loud's house in school, and it sounds like peace when we are in our classroom. And then I hear my teacher's computer. I hear the doors. I hear desks moving and seats. I hear the whistle to line up. It sounds like it's loud, but fun. Okay, so that's Tavius's poem. And next we have Mark A's poem, Cars, Trucks, People. I hear the cars beeping, beep, beep. I hear trains around my apartment, chugga, chugga, choo, choo. I hear semi-trucks honking, honk, honk, honk. I hear the clock, tick, tick, tock, tick, tock. I hear the garbage truck getting garbage, crash, crash. Okay, and this is also an invitation to try to spell certain sounds, you know, putting your lips together. What is that? I don't know. 2 F's, 3 R's, 4 O's, and some M's, you know. So, all right, thank you. And from that, from looking at the poems, then we move into a brainstorm section. And here we have a place for young people to think about where they hear different sounds. So they can begin, it's almost like beginning by walking oneself, remembering from the moment you woke up, what's one of the first things you heard? What did you hear in the house as you're coming forward? What did you hear between the house and school? And then when you get to school, what are you hearing there? Okay. So an example, of course, is what do you hear at home? My cat meowing for food. What do you hear outside? The wind blowing through trees. What do you hear at school? Fingers typing on computers. And so we'll usually do some brainstorming together as a group, and then students are invited to brainstorm independently or maybe with a partner. And we always talk about how the brainstorm is how we generate our ideas that we're going to use moving forward in order to write our poems. And from there, we get into the actual writing. I don't know if 4 minutes is enough time for us to write any poems, but I suppose we could maybe think about the brainstorm. What do you hear at home? Let's see, what do I hear at home? I hear, yes, we heard our coffee makers brewing. I hear the wind, the way the wind whips. There's a certain kind of whirring whip that the wind makes when I only have my window half cracked open. I hear traffic. Sometimes if I'm super quiet, I think I can hear my eyelashes when I blink. Okay, Jen says, last night she heard the rain against the window. Yeah, there was a lot of that. And I think that tends to be kind of a soothing a soothing sound, a familiar sound that we all kind of enjoy. I shouldn't say we all kind of enjoy. I should say that many people enjoy. I actually like the sound of rain myself. Thank you for that. Much cherished dishwashing running. Washer. A much cherished dishwasher running. Yes, well, I'm the dishwasher in this house. So anyway, we can't, the only things that we're hearing in the morning, we also have a water distiller here. That's not always one of my favorite sounds in the morning. I tend to like quiet mornings. The air purifier going off, okay. Sometimes we hear sirens in the morning. One time we talked about becoming familiar with the people in your household, like knowing who's moving about the house according to the sound of their footsteps. And we, a lot of people realize that, oh, you can tell the gate. You can tell by the sound of the shoe on the floor or the bare foot on the floor who's walking through the house. Upstairs neighbor, yes. Yeah, I have a neighbor. I can tell whenever they're taking a bath. It's like it sounds like a and it's interesting. I can't hear any, I don't hear anything else that happens in that apartment. But as soon as they start running that bath water, it sounds like there's a very serious pool somewhere nearby. And I sometimes when my imagination is going crazy, I wonder like which wall is the water about to burst through, So, okay. With that, I guess I will open up the floor to any questions or comments or concerns. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that I've hit on something that was of use. And I also would like, I'm going to stick something else in the chat that I remembered later, that Gwendolyn Brooks actually had something called Little Lessons for Writing Poetry. And for instance, like the first one is, poems do not have to rhyme. Little lessons. And I think there's 20 little lessons. And she encourages things like becoming friends with your dictionary. Okay. All right. Thank you. No questions? Let's see if I happen to have. Oh, well, actually, we'll be breaking soon for Timothy's teacher workshop. Older students, let's see. So Gwendolyn Brooks' little lessons include poems that do not have to rhyme. Number 2, in your poem, talk about what you know, talk about what you think, talk about what you feel, talk about what you wonder. Number 3, every day make notes on what you feel. Number 4, try different ways of saying a thing, then choose the way that seems best. Number 5, be yourself. Do not imitate other poets. You are as important as they are. Number 6, keep a diary. And so sometimes I think it's fun. I've never done this with the younger group. I've worked with some older students where we went through Gwendolyn Brooks' little lessons one by one, with students reading aloud and talking about each one. Oh, will I read another poem? So sweet. Let's see how long it'll take me to find something. I should have been at the ready. Let's see here. I love reading, and I find that a lot of people love to be read to, including myself. Let's see, who was my go-to poet for inspiration when I hit a roadblock? Wow. Well, I always love Lucille Clifton. I always love Mary Oliver. I always love Tyemba Jess. You know, of course, I'll be thinking of a super long list as soon as this session is over with. I love Joy Harjo. Yeah, I mean, some of these poets, for me, it's like reading their work is like going to church, right? Yes, well, Timothy is going to be using a Joy Harjo poem, so I guess I won't read from A Map to the Next World right now. Thank you for asking that question. Do you have a favorite poet who you go to? Or who you enjoy? I'm just getting in touch with poets, so trying to, oh, okay, oh man, have fun, Bob. Have fun. You may have to just get some anthologies. You're welcome. Well, we have a few more minutes. Okay. Let's see here. Tim actually introduced me to a wonderful book last year called Healing the Divide, Poems of Kindness and Connection. And let me see if I can find something from here. There are a number of poems that I liked from here, but any other time, you know, I keep these flags in my books, and every now and then I go, you're so ridiculous. And then I take the flags out. And then on a day like today, when I need to be able to go to something that I love, I can't. Well, we'll simply read Blessing the Boats by Lucille Clifton. May the tide that is entering even now, the lip of our understanding, carry you out beyond the face of fear. May you kiss the wind, then turn from it, certain that it will love you back. May you open your eyes to water, water waving forever. And may you, in your innocence, sail through this to that. And I have to say that I actually I found a poem in here, a teacher who I was working with. I also want to give a shout out to teachers. There's some wonderful teachers to partner with, and teachers who welcome creative, imaginative hour. When Chicago Poetry Center poets come into their classroom, they participate, they encourage their students to participate. They encourage the students to feel like this is a special time that we have together. But one of the teachers that I was working with, I think her dog died. And there was a poem in here about the sympathy that a dog shared with someone who was going through a hurting period. And I sent her that poem, and she really liked it. And she said that she shared it with her family, and they liked it too. Okay. Thank you. I guess I'll quit jabbering.